Okay, Dr. Jeffrey Bale, thanks so much for joining.
You're welcome, Joseph.
I wanted to get your opinion on this Iran intervention. We're now about a month in. It seems quite risky. A lot of the people I speak to on the right have sort of a non-committal, cautious opinion about what's happening, in as much as we actually know what's happening. So do you have an opinion? Are you for, against? How do you view this kind of gamble by the Trump administration?
Well, in terms of the geopolitical aspect of it, I'm totally for it. I mean, I think this should have been done decades ago. We've put up with this Shia theocratic Islamist regime, which has sponsored terrorism all over the world and destabilized the Middle East now for decades. And from the moment that they seized the American hostages and seized the embassy in 1979 until the present, they've been denouncing the U.S., yelling death to America, and of course that would include its allies, and death to Israel. And basically, they're an apocalyptic millenarian theocratic regime, which is a revolutionary regime. It's not a status quo regime. And this is what our dim-witted foreign policy experts don't seem to understand, that there's a fundamental difference between status quo powers that are jockeying for position in geopolitical terms and revolutionary regimes which aim to overthrow the existing international order. And Iran is a revolutionary regime that aims to overthrow the international order, just like all Islamist regimes, all Islamist movements and regimes, Sunni and Shia. So the idea that we can coexist with the Iranian regime, maybe you can coexist with a regime like that prior to it crossing the nuclear threshold, but you cannot allow a regime like that to acquire nuclear weapons. I mean, they've already demonstrated, they've already lied about, for example, their ballistic missiles. They claimed that they had ballistic missiles that only traveled a certain direction, and they've already fired some ballistic missiles that traveled further than they claimed that they had. So the regime has been lying and been deceptive from day one. I don't think there's any way to really negotiate with a regime like that. And so there's only two real possibilities. Either you've got to seriously degrade the military, technological, logistical, and operational capabilities of such a regime to the point where they can't threaten people, or you've got to overthrow the regime. And so I think my view is the Trump administration has finally decided enough is enough. And even now the Iranians are bragging they can make 11 nuclear bombs right away if they needed to. I mean, I don't know if they lie all the time, they exaggerate, they pretend to be victorious when they're getting their asses kicked. So you can never believe a single thing that they say. But the point is that the worst case scenario is that the Iranian regime's capabilities will be severely degraded, making them much less of a threat. I mean, the best case scenario, of course, would be if the regime collapsed or the people rose up and overthrew it. I don't think that's very likely because the one thing the Iranian regime is good at is repression, is repressing unarmed citizens. I mean, that's really what their apparatus, the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guard, and the Basij, the paramilitary militia, which is under the control of the Revolutionary Guard. That's the main reason why those organizations exist, is to protect the Islamic revolutionary regime and to crush any kind of domestic dissent. And they're very efficient at doing that. So I don't see much chance of the regime collapsing. But I don't think that was really the goal of the Trump administration anyway. I mean, of course, there were some neocons that were advocating, we've got to keep doing this until the regime collapses. But you can't really make the regime. Air power alone cannot bring about the collapse of a regime. I mean, that's been demonstrated several times. You need to have a popular uprising and/or ground troops, and we're not going to invade Iran with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of ground troops. That's really off the cards because Trump is not a neocon. Trump is not a person who wants to invade countries and get bogged down and meshed in countries. Trump is a person who wants to carry out swift, decisive, overwhelming military strikes against enemies to achieve limited objectives. And that's basically what he's trying to do. So right now, they're just in the process of degrading the Iranians' military and technological capabilities, and they've done that with dramatic effectiveness. Of course, there's always surprises. In any kind of military conflict, the enemy is going to be more resilient in some ways and is going to be able to carry out some surprise operations, because we don't, you can't predict 100% what the enemy's actions will be ahead of time. And so they're going to be firing missiles at American bases. They're going to be firing missiles and cruise missiles and rockets and so forth at Gulf states. And they're going to do those things. And some of them are going to get through. That's just inevitable. But I think my own view is that this thing won't last more than another few weeks. I mean, I would say 60 days at the outset. We've already been had 30 days. We've already degraded the Iranian capacities by 70 or 80%. We're running out of actual targets. I mean, the remaining capacities seem to be hidden away in areas where we can't locate them. We've decimated the Iranian Republic's leadership, and now nobody really wants to step up and be supreme leader because then they'll be the first person to be targeted. I mean, we've taken out like leaders of the Revolutionary Guard, the Navy, the Army, and so forth and so on. And so I think so far we've been devastatingly effective in terms of degrading the capacities of the regime, and also degrading the capacities of its proxies. Israel's hammering Hezbollah now, and they've done a really good job targeting and eliminating Iranian leadership. So we're really at the point where the regime, they have a plan. It's called the Mosaic. They have what they call a Mosaic strategy, which is in the event of decapitation of the leadership in Iran, they've created a decentralized command structure based on the provinces, the 31 provinces. And so there's commanders of the IRGC and other forces in all the provinces who are going to be more or less autonomous, carrying out actions on their own initiative, because the central control is broken down and command and control is broken down. So that's what we see now. And I don't know that we can really eliminate all these decentralized structures. We've certainly done a good job of degrading the central government and the command and control apparatus. So I think there are going to be. I mean, right now we're in this thing where Trump is saying we're negotiating. I don't think the Iranians are going to make any major concessions, and even if they do, you can't trust them, to be honest with you. So I think what we're going to end up having to do is take Kharg Island. We're either going to have to blockade it or seize control of it. We've already destroyed the military targets on Kharg Island. The only thing left is the oil production facilities and the ports and everything there. So we're going to have to take over Kharg Island, I think, which is probably going to be an operation carried out by the Marines and maybe the paratroopers. And then we might have to have a limited incursion into the littoral zone of Iran, right around the Straits of Hormuz, in order to eliminate hidden batteries and cruise missile things and destroy all their fast attack boats. The main Iranian strategy for blocking the Strait of Hormuz is they have like hundreds of fast speedboats armed with machine guns and missiles, and so their strategy is to swarm any kind of naval vessels. And so the naval vessels on our ships and the high-tech missiles that we have and are not really able to deal with those low-tech swarms of Iranian fast boats. And so that's why we brought over those A-10 Warthogs, those Army planes, which are heavily armored and have Gatling guns and cannons and rockets as well. And those are the perfect weapons to blow these little boats out of the water, to target them and blow them out of the water. Much more effective than anti-ship missiles and the guns on destroyers and things like that, or even aircraft, which are too fast. I mean, jet fighters are too fast to really target these things effectively. And anyway, so that's what we're going to have to do. I think we're going to have some kind of incursion in the littoral region around the Strait of Hormuz, and I think we're going to have to at least blockade Kharg Island, if not seize control over it.
And that would involve it sounds like committing ground troops of
Yeah,
some
that's why we've
sort.
got 2 Marine Expeditionary Forces, and we've got the 82nd Airborne. I think it's the 82nd. Or is it the 101st? I can't remember. One of our airborne divisions. Some components of it are now in that zone. So I think basically, I mean, Trump is basically telling the Iranian government, look, if we wanted to, we could destroy your whole power grid. We don't want to do that though, because if we did that, then then all the Iranian people would be suffering. They wouldn't have sewers, they wouldn't have electricity, they wouldn't have. I mean, it would be it would be do a tremendous amount of harm to the population in Iran that hates the regime. And so you don't want to, not all of it. I mean, 30% of the population supports the regime, I would guess, probably 70% opposed to it. If we were to make all their lives miserable by destroying all the infrastructure, apart from being like, maybe overkill, it would really have a counterproductive effect, I think, in terms of the attitudes of the civilian population towards us. It might even cause them to rally around the regime more. So I think that would be a very dangerous and probably foolhardy action. So I think it's going to be limited incursions and basically creating a situation where the Iranians can't sell any oil to anybody. They can't sell any oil to anybody, which means they're going to be bankrupt. And they're already having a problem selling, getting ships through to sell oil now. And so if we just say, look, we're just going to sit here on blockade cargo, and you're not going to be able to sell any oil to anybody. Your main source of revenue is going to be cut off. I mean, you're basically toast economically. The main thing, though, is we have to reopen the Straits of Hormuz because that's having a major negative impact on the world economy and on the price of oil and things like that. I mean, it's not so much it's affecting us in the United States, but we're mostly self-sufficient with respect to our oil. I mean, the Europeans are the ones who are really screwed. The Europeans are screwed. China's screwed. East Asian countries, some other East Asian countries are in real trouble that get oil from the Middle East. So the main negative effect of the interruption of blockade, or if you want to call it the partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, is going to be on other countries, although it's going to affect us as well. So we need to end that one way or the other. And I think if we basically prevent the Iranians from selling any oil at all, I mean, they're going to be in a position where they really have to open up the Straits of Hormuz, I think, so that's what I think is going to happen. I mean, there was some fantasies about like the president in Iran, who normally doesn't have much power, Pezeshkian, who, maybe like being a reasonable, moderate voice who could outmaneuver like the people supported by the clerics and the Revolutionary Guard. But he's been further weakened. And, then there were fantasies like the Kurds and the Azeris might cross the Iranian frontier and help bring about the collapse of the regime. I don't think that's going to happen. There's a Baluchi insurgency. There's the Mujahideen Khalq, this crazy organization that combines. It's like a cult-like organization that's anti-regime that combines like socialism with Shiism. I don't think they're going to be able to overthrow the regime. The population is
Jeff,
disarmed.
there's an acronym for them. Is that the group?
Yeah, MEK.
MEK. Yeah.
And so I just don't think that the only way that the regime could collapse, I think, would be if large sections of the army were to defect or were to turn against the regime. And, that might be the straw that broke the camel's back. But, obviously, if you're one of these military officers, even if you hate the regime, you know that if you revolt against the regime and you fail, you're going to be executed, so it's a very risky thing, and I think people have to feel that the regime is basically on the verge of collapse before anybody's going to really take a risk of carrying out action against them.
Right. And then as far as domestic support, or, not support in the US, this seems to be framed within the backdrop of the Gulf War.
Which is
commitment of ground troops. And at least on the right, what I observe is people don't want any kind of commitment of troops at all, practically almost no military intervention unless it's completely clean.
Yeah, well, those people are delusional. I mean, they're delusional just like people on the left who oppose every war and cheer on our enemies, with the exception of Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainian war was the only war that everybody on the left was enthusiastic about. Uh, but every other war the U.S. has been involved with for decades, the left and the pacifists and everything are 100% opposed to it. And then, that's just the way things. Not 100%, but mostly opposed to it. The Democratic Party waffles. I mean, has waffled in the past, but now they're 100% opposed to anything Trump does, just automatically. So even like Schumer and all these Democrats who previously argued that the Iranians couldn't be allowed to get nuclear weapons, and we might have to take. Now they're all pretending like this is a disaster and a fiasco, and we shouldn't have done it, and all this kind of nonsense. So they have no principles at all. It's all about political advantage for these Democrats, and the Democrat Party has been effectively taken over by its left-wing base. I mean, there are no moderates in the Democrat Party, and the ones who are moderate are pandering to the left because they don't want to be voted out of office and replaced by people more radical than they are. So the Democrat Party is just a catastrophe now. And as far as these elements of the right, the extreme isolationist right, these people live in a fantasy world like the libertarians, and they're as naive about world politics as people on the left tend to be. And as if you can have any kind of military action anywhere that's without risks. There's no such thing as having carrying out a military operation without having risks involved. Now, obviously, nobody, including Trump, including people in his administration, nobody wants to get involved in a ground war in Iran. We're gonna get bogged down in a mess like Iraq, where we made all these dumb mistakes and everything like that. Nobody wants to do that, and certainly Trump's not going to do that. So if you want to pretend that, like, let's say sending the Marines and seizing Kharg Island is the same thing as sending 200,000 troops into Iraq, I mean, you can do that. It's just not true. It's just a false statement. I mean, these people would have been against the Maduro thing too, except that it was so successful in one day.
Right. It's like, if it works out, I'm for it,
Correct.
but I'm going to be against it while it's in process.
That's right. And look, and a lot of these people, especially on the neo-isolationist right, certainly when we get over to the radical right, we're talking about people who are anti-Semites in many cases, who think that Israel is manipulating U.S. foreign policy, and where the Jews are controlling America, the Jews are controlling American foreign policy, and they're just like crackpots, like people on the left are, like the Islamists, the Jew-hating Islamists, and the anti-Zionist leftists. These are all people who really hate Israel, if not hate Jews in general, and so therefore, any war in the Middle East, they're going to be opposed to, because they're going to assume that somehow Israel is pulling the strings, and that's basically the way they think. I think a lot of these people.
Yeah, and there seems to be a denial or an inability to understand what I think is the need for American hegemony.
Correct.
In the world, that this is a benefit to the world and also to average Americans that would be MAGA voters who live in flyover states. Like, the ability to be free and to thrive economically is directly linked to America being the global superpower and exercising its will over the world.
Well, I don't know about the latter. In other words, I don't think we should be the world's policeman. I don't think, this is where the liberal internationalists and the neocons have everything wrong, that we should be using American power to, quote unquote, spread democracy, or we should be using American power.
Not to spread, I'm not in favor of, quote unquote, spreading democracy,
but because we can't.
To advance American interests with, limited interventions where necessary.
Correct. Well, that's always going to be necessary. There's never going to be a time when we're not going to have to apply surgical military power. I mean, we have to do it now. We have to carry out drone strikes against jihadists when we find them and they're representing dangers. We have to do that. The people who are against drone attacks and surgical strikes, they also don't want us to be engaged in carpet bombing anybody. I mean, they're against every kind of intervention. If you're opposed to carrying out surgical strikes against jihadists, you're certainly going to be opposed to carrying out carpet bombing in Afghanistan or someplace like that, where you're going to be killing a lot more innocent people indiscriminately, right? There's discriminate attacks and there's indiscriminate attacks. So if you're opposed to like like special operations raids and drone strikes, limited operations to target enemies. You're basically opposed to any U.S. military action anywhere ever. Basically, that's what that means. So, the people who have the people who either have this naive fantasy that we're going to be the world's policemen and we're going to spread democracy everywhere, blah, blah, blah. That's been a complete catastrophe for decades. That effort has been finished. And anybody could have told you that that effort was going to fail, because it requires in order to believe that, you have to be shockingly ignorant about the cultural values of other civilizations and other countries. Democratic ideas are a Western idea. There may be certain elites or certain westernized elites in other countries who embrace them, but the majority of people in third world countries and in East Asia and in various other countries do not embrace democratic values.
Yeah, and in a way, Iran is actually,
or in the Middle East. I mean, imagine.
Yeah, in a way, Iran is a perfect example of this. It's not a neocon foreign policy because it's a limited engagement.
Correct.
The objective is not to spread democracy or for regime change. If that
Correct.
happens as a knock-on effect,
Yes,
but
right.
the objective is to neutralize a threat.
Correct.
And stabilize.
And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, anybody argues that the threat shouldn't be neutralized, I think, is living in a fantasy world. I mean, we've had decades of appeasement of the Iranian regime. Decades of appeasement of the Iranians, beginning with Reagan. You remember when the Hezbollah proxy, which is controlled by Iran, blew up the Marine base in Lebanon and blew up the French paratrooper base?
Yeah.
What did Reagan do? He had some battleships shell Hezbollah regions in Lebanon. That was all he did. That was a totally weak response. And then shortly thereafter, he made a deal with the Iranian regime to buy arms from the Iranian regime to sell to the Contras in Nicaragua, the Iran-Contra deal. That was Reagan's response when the Iranians killed 240 Marines. And of course, this under Carter, they'd already seized the American hostages and held them for 444 days, right? So Reagan at least got the hostages freed, but then he basically made deals with the Iranian regime and didn't do anything at all to deal with them. And then we had Clinton, didn't really do much. And then Bush, talked tough, but didn't do anything. Obama was a blatant appeaser of the Iranian regime with the nuclear deal, which was a complete joke. Biden was even worse. And so literally all these people, the best you can say, apart from just talking about the delusions and the appeasement of some of these people, the best you can say is that all these previous presidents kicked the can down the road. They kicked the can down the road, just like they did with North Korea. Clinton kicked the can down the road in North Korea. He thought, well, we can give North Korea economic aid, and then that'll moderate the regime, and then the North Korean regime will become more moderate and become part of the family of nations and blah, blah, blah. I mean, just completely delusional thinking, man, if you know anything about the ideology of the North Korean regime. So, and of course, what happened after paying off and trying to bribe the North Korean regime? The North Koreans developed nuclear weapons anyway. They developed ballistic missiles, and so this whole idea that like you can bribe revolutionary regimes run by extremists, by ideological extremists, you can't treat them like normal political leaders who are just nationalists or other geopolitical concerns. These are people with extremist radical agendas who want to overturn the world order. They don't want to be part of the world order. They want to overturn the world order. And so you can't make deals with these kinds of regimes. I mean, you can make temporary truces and so forth and so on, but the idea you can have a permanent peace with an Islamist regime, impossible, 100% impossible. And then, so all these presidents have done, all these foreign policy experts, both Democrat and Republican, all the geniuses in the academia, who've been promoting all these stupid policies, liberal internationalism, neoconservatism, they haven't accomplished anything. All they've done is kick the can down the road and created a situation where now we're in a situation where we have to act, or the Iranians are going to have a nuclear capability. That's basically where we're at now.
Yeah, it seems to be a challenge just generally for Americans seem to not understand generally that people don't think like they do.
Correct.
In other cultures. So
correct.
You have that, and then also that geopolitics and international affairs are either not understood by most Americans or wildly unpopular if it
Well, they're not understood
involves.
by anybody. I mean, the thing which is interesting about it is that the elites are even more clueless than the masses here. I mean, they're the ones that are pushing the naive fantasy that cultural differences don't matter, that all humans are the same, they all want the same things, and we can make agreements with everybody, we can be friends with everybody, kumbaya, and it's okay if we let millions of migrants from the world's most regressive, dysfunctional countries into Western countries. They're going to assimilate easily, and they're just going to end up being like Westerners. It's completely delusional thinking. I mean, there's no evidence to support any of these globalist fantasies, these globalist cosmopolitan fantasies. None. And yet, Western elites just keep doubling down on the lunacy. They keep doubling down on failed policies and all the experts that advise them. Experts. So, I mean, they seem to be totally incapable. Western elites seem to be totally incapable of learning any lessons from all their failures over a period of decades. Really, since the end of the World War II, it's failure after failure after failure, where no lessons at all are learned. They just keep making the same mistakes and advocating the same failed policies, and actually doubling down and tripling down on it. It's just getting worse, if anything. So I don't know. I mean, when you've got the elites, the people who are supposedly educated, and the people who are supposedly world wise, who are living in such a fantasy world, it's not surprising that the majority of people are confused and don't know what the hell to believe and don't know what's going on. Most people are concerned about how things affect them directly. So the reason why a lot of people don't like the Iran war now is because the gas prices are up. It's driving up gas prices and prices on certain other things that are shipping costs are going up. So regular citizens are worried about it. They don't have a positive attitude toward it because they think this is going to be a thing that's going to go on and on and on and lead to economic hardship.
Yeah.
And so from that point, if you believe that that's the case, then you can understand them not being happy about it. But what happens if in 2 weeks the Iranians basically concede that they're not going to block the Straits of Hormuz, and the wars is basically over, except that their capabilities have been degraded 75 or 80%. That's a victory.
Yeah. And everyone will.
I don't know. I mean, people. I mean, at that point, everybody should go, this has been a grand success.
Yeah, right? I totally agree. And I don't know why everyone isn't just reserving judgment until after it's completed to see what the result is.
A lot of it is just because they're pushing their own political agendas. If you're a Democrat or a progressive, anything Trump does, you're just not going to like it on general principle, even if it's something you yourself advocated like 10 years ago. Okay, if you're one of these isolationists or these libertarians, you're living in a fantasy world all the time, just like extremists on the left and right live in a fantasy world. You're living in a world where you think this is the way things should be, not the world where the way things actually are. So when you've got so many people that are living in little bubbles, and don't know anything. I mean, it's just like before. People used to joke when the Ukraine war broke out. 99% of the people who were taking strong positions on the Ukraine war couldn't even identify where Ukraine was on the map.
Yeah.
When the Gulf War broke out, they couldn't have identified where Iraq was on the fucking map.
Yeah.
And most of them, until recently, couldn't have identified where Iran was on a map. If you showed them a blank map and asked them to point out where Iran was, they wouldn't have even known. Most of them know nothing at all about history. They don't know anything about war, about military strategy. They know nothing at all about Islam. They know nothing about Islamism. They know nothing about Persian culture. I mean, they literally don't know anything. And so my feeling is if you don't know anything about these subjects, then just shut the fuck up, man. But no, everybody who's a pundit or who claims to be an expert, they're constantly going, even if they are an expert on something, they're constantly going outside of their lane. They're constantly pontificating about subjects they don't know anything about. Like if there's a crisis in North Korea, these same people are going to be pontificating about that, right?
Yeah.
Do any of them know the Korean language? No. Do any of them know anything about the history of Korea? No. Do any of them know anything about the Juche, the ideology of the North Korean regime? No. I mean, so they're just going to be talking out their ass, on all these talk shows.
Yeah, it's appalling. And the thing that bothers me the most is the lack of humility and approaching these subjects with humility, even if they're covering them
Correct.
on their shows. Like
Yes.
I'm just
Correct.
thinking of Brett Weinstein.
Uh huh.
Now we have to listen to Brett Weinstein talk about global security issues,
He doesn't know
like in the
shit about
Middle
global
East. He doesn't
security.
know a fucking thing.
He went off the deep end, and I mean, he went totally off the deep end. I mean, like about 6 months ago, he was interviewing Ron Johnson. And they were talking about 9/11 conspiracy theories, as if
Yeah.
they were legitimate. I almost felt like contacting Brett Weinstein and said, "Dude, you're making a fool out of yourself. You're totally discrediting yourself. You're way out of your lane. You're talking about subjects you literally know nothing about." And why do people feel this? I mean, I understand if you're doing a talk show 2 times a week and you got to come up with subjects to talk about, and this is the thing that's currently in the news, so I'm going to talk about it. Fine, talk about it. But why don't you invite somebody on who's actually an expert on the damn subject instead of
Precisely.
you know instead of just shooting your own mouth off when you don't know what you're talking about? It's just like
Um,
I'm not going to go on a show and talk about like infectious diseases. I'm not an expert on infectious diseases. You know, why would I be pontificating about infectious diseases? It would be like an embarrassment. I'd be putting my foot in my mouth again and again, and making a fool out of myself. So I don't understand why these people. Well, one reason why they keep making fools out of themselves is because they're never held accountable. All the people who designed policies like for the Iraq War. I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing to say, look, Saddam is a bad guy. We should get rid of Saddam and his cronies. I even thought we should get rid of Saddam and his cronies. But literally a month into the war, once the regime collapsed, a month after that, I changed my mind completely because they were already doing crazy things like de-Baathification. To me, the only solution in Iraq was to get rid of Saddam and his cronies and leave the Baathists in charge. The Baathists were suppressing the Islamists. It was a minority, but it was a dictatorial regime, but it was a secular ideology that the Baathists had, and they were repressing the Islamists. They were keeping a lid on the country. They've been governing the country for decades. They knew how to keep a lid on the country. We should have just turned over the country to the Baathists, for fuck's sake, with minus Saddam and his psychotic sons and a few of their cronies.
yeah.
But instead, we do this radical de-Baathification policy. Even after World War II, we didn't have a radical denazification policy, for example, in Germany. We got rid of the top layers of the Nazis. We didn't persecute everybody that was a member of the Nazi Party. It would have been millions of Germans. That would have been totally counterproductive. So why would you have a radical de-Baathification policy where you're persecuting all these people who joined the Baath Party who are not even ideological Baathists, but who joined the Baath Party for careerist reasons and other things, right? You're going to go after thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who are members of the Baath Party and not let them be part of any future government in Iraq? I mean, what a stupid plan. And then disbanding the Iraqi army and letting them go home with their weapons. I mean, can you imagine anything stupider than that? And all of a sudden, these guys they're home with their weapons and not getting paid. How are they going to feed their families? I mean, can you imagine anything stupider than Bremer's policies in Iraq were a complete and utter frigging catastrophe. And the moment he pushed those things, like a month after the regime collapsed, I said, this is going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And sure enough, turned into a disaster. Then we preside over elections that could only be won by Shia Islamist parties, supported by Iran. So we ended up basically putting the Islamists in power in Iraq. I mean, it's just like the dumbest thing in human history, our Iraq policy.
I think the cluelessness of Iraq, I think, has created like the collective trauma for Americans when they view any military intervention. They just see it in the frame of another Iraq.
Correct.
Where soldiers are going to die for Halliburton and Dick Cheney for oil. And that it's essentially like it's a corrupt operation that isn't in American interests. So,
but even that narrative, the whole thing about oil is stupid. because the best way to have more oil would be to make a deal with Saddam's regime. You
Right.
know, we had deals with the Gulf states. We even had a bit of a deal with Iran at that point. I mean, we weren't invading them. I mean, there was we if we wanted to get more oil from Iraq, we could have made deals with Saddam. If it was really about oil, obviously it wasn't about oil. I mean, to suggest it was about oil, I mean, it was about to some extent protecting the Gulf states after Saddam had invaded Kuwait. I mean, there were fears that Saddam might try to invade Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. You know,
Yeah,
so in
I
that
think
sense,
something that gets lost about neoconservatives. I knew several prominent ones during the Iraq War. I didn't share
mhm,
their views, but had
yeah,
access to them. And I have to say, they believed in an ideology of
yeah, they
spreading
do,
democracy to the Middle East. They
absolutely,
actually believed that,
they do,
and I
they
think
actually
it
do believe it.
gets
And
lost in
so do
history
the
that
liberal, so do the
like
liberal internationalists. They
yeah,
believe that.
like they believed that it
Mhm.
wasn't just like an operation for
No,
oil and the
it
American
wasn't just
machine.
it wasn't a spurious rationale for greed. They actually
Exactly.
believe it. They actually believe it. Yeah, there's this messianic aspect of American foreign policy that always has been, where we're going to spread, we're going to Americanize everything, and this is going to be a good thing, democratizing America, you know. So people actually believe that, you
Yeah,
know.
I was at a dinner in Turkey with the son of a prominent like industrial family, like a sort of leading family in Turkey that was a neocon, and he was talking about this dream of like taking the hijab and the headscarves off of all of the
Yes.
women in Saudi
Oh, for
Arabia.
God's
Like they really believed that.
Yeah, I know they do.
That if we just with the help of the American military, we could just liberate all of these cultures.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's
just
just it's
total
so bloody.
lunacy.
It's so bloody naive, man. It's the typical hubris of of imperial powers and superpowers. It's that throughout history they've had
Yeah,
those kind of fantasies, and then been the results of all this stuff, and they end up collapsing.
yeah.
They overextend themselves. They get enmeshed in all kinds of conflicts. They overstretch their resources, and then they eventually collapse. So
So Jeff, I want to ask you about there seems to be a rise in prominence. I don't know how real it is electorally in the libertarian movement in America. And I wonder if you could, there are some internet personalities that are libertarian. We have a few politicians, but there seems to be popularity on the right of kind of isolationists and libertarians. In my view, I see it as something. It seems as childish as leftism
it
to
is
me, in the sense that it's a way of opting out of making difficult decisions
correct.
for foreign policy. There's something infantile about it.
There is something
But
infantile about it.
what are the origins of the libertarian movement, and like what
Well,
is libertarianism?
that's a more complicated subject. I mean, libertarianism. There's all these thinkers. There's these famous libertarian thinkers. Um, uh, that go back to really to John Locke's notion of natural rights. I mean, he wasn't a libertarian, but then you have all these famous libertarian thinkers. You've got Friedrich Hayek, and you've got Milton Friedman, and you've got what's the other fellow's name? Uh, oh yeah, Ludwig von Mises. Ludwig von Mises. These are like the main libertarian thinkers, and these are people who are totally against like centralized government and against authoritarian government and government intervention. They really are in favor of like voluntary associations and free markets. Their main thing is free markets, though. The main thing about libertarianism, this is where it differs from anarchism. The main thing about libertarianism is promotion of individual liberty and free markets. Free markets. But I call them free market fundamentalists. They actually believe that the free market solves every problem, and that any kind of government intervention in the economy is bad, and that tariffs are always bad, and that they basically have this kind of like naive faith in the free market, like a magical faith in the free market, kind of childish, I think. Now, I'm a supporter of the free market. I mean, but I don't think that I think that in modern industrial or post-industrial societies, you need to have government. The government has to be a check on the excesses of the private sector, and the private sector has to be a check on the excesses of government. You can't just let the free market run amok, because you just end up with monopoly capitalism, where you've got a small number of powerful firms price fixing and doing all these things, and without anybody stopping them. What's to stop them? You know what I mean? So the free market in and of itself. And the other thing about libertarianism is this ridiculous idea of privatizing everything. Government should only exist to defend the country, or maybe to preserve law and order, although maybe even law and order can be privatized. So this whole crazy fetish that, like, if we privatize things that government does, because government's so inefficient, which government often is inefficient, but if we can privatize these things and make them more efficient, that'll be much better. And then we can just keep shrinking the size of government till it almost doesn't exist. I mean, that's kind of the libertarian fantasy. So for the libertarians, like, any kind of foreign war means that you're going to have like a strengthening and centralization of government, because the government's going to be the one that's waging it, and you're deploying the military and doing all those kinds of things for overseas. So they don't like that. The other thing, of course, about libertarianism, they're for open borders. Libertarians are for open borders, because they're so focused on individual liberty that they don't even recognize, like, that effectively people from different nation states and people from different civilizations and people from different cultures have different values. They have the same naive notion as the multiculturalists on the left, that we're all just as people have more in common than differences, and we can all just get along and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's ridiculous, utterly childish.
It's like isn't it called the non-aggression principle?
Well, that's good. I mean, the non-aggression principle is good. It's, if you can agree with other people, you won't aggress on them and they won't aggress on you. It's kind of like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The problem is there's always going to be people who violate it. What do you do about the people who violate it?
What do you do with a Shia cult in the Middle East? Your non-aggression principle.
Correct. Exactly. And by the way, this is the other thing. People have this thing, well, we don't want to, Iran's not our enemy, or, all this kind of nonsense. You don't get to decide who your enemies are. They decide. They've identified us as their enemy. Our enemies identify us as their enemy. That makes us their enemy. Whether we want to be their enemy or not, they're targeting us. They're declaring us that we are their enemy. If somebody's declaring that you're their enemy, you better take them seriously. You can't pretend, they're not really our enemy, we can be friends. When they're telling you they want to destroy America, how are you going to be friends with somebody who's claiming to destroy America, whose goal is to destroy America? I mean, it's just utterly juvenile. So yeah, from my point of view, libertarianism is just as utopian. That's the better word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Naive and utopian as like the absurd ideologies on the left.
Yeah, and I think the ones that I interact with, I get messages from some of them. It's just like a way of opting out of difficult decisions that have to be made for a country like America and an empire like America.
Correct.
As if we can just walk away, like take our ball and go home.
Well, we could do that,
but what would happen? And it's a way of virtue signaling.
Well, it's a way of virtue signaling. But if we took our ball and go home, nature abhors a vacuum, and so do politics. If we took our ball and went home, some other power would fill the vacuum. Any place we withdraw from, then other people are going to fill that vacuum, and most likely going to be China or Russia or horrible regimes in the Middle East if we were to withdraw from certain regions.
Yeah.
Even if we withdrew from Europe, I mean, who would be filling the vacuum? Like progressive globalist numbskulls, so progressive, numbskulls. So it's just utterly absurd. It's one thing to say you don't want to be the world's policeman. It's not our job to go all over the world and suppress conflict and force everybody to get along. That's not our job, or to spread democracy. But it is our job to defend America's geopolitical interests. And we can't defend America's geopolitical interests if we totally withdraw and adopt an isolationist stance. So this isolationism is just a foolish belief system. Anyway, so I would say that I don't really think the libertarians have much influence, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah.
they have a bunch of think tanks, the Independent Institute, the Cato Institute. They have Rand Paul and maybe Massey in Congress. Uh, but I mean, the Libertarian Party never does very well in elections. Basically, the Libertarian Party in America is even more ridiculous because not only is it like want to privatize everything, but they don't want to pay taxes. Their main thing is to not pay taxes. That's what I feel most people vote for libertarians. They think taxation is theft, and therefore they don't want to pay any taxes to the government. I think that's what a lot of the motivation for people who are libertarians.
Right. Jeff, another question is, I think one of the disconnects with this operation in Iran and any intervention is that domestically, because of, maybe AI or just the state of the economy, there's a lack of clarity um, economically and for people's futures.
Absolutely.
And the Trump administration is simultaneously messaging that there's a golden age, like we're on the precipice of a golden age of all of these jobs and prosperity.
Hmm.
Simultaneously, everyone is being told by these AI CEOs that they're all going to be replaced,
Yeah.
which I think is like, it seems to be kind of a lie, and that these guys have a lot of investment cash that they have to keep, coming in, and they want to push adoption of this thing.
Right.
So there seems to be a disconnect now where if you're a young person or anyone really, there's a lack of clarity on what your future looks like as an
Correct.
American. And simultaneously, you're supposed to give a shit about a foreign military intervention that is going to allow you to thrive and take care of your security.
Right. Well, I think the Trump administration's messaging has been absolutely atrocious on every issue. I think that they should be out there every day talking about immigration problems and what they're doing about it, the positive steps they're taking to deal with immigration problems, not allowing the left to control the narrative, which they've done. Um, on the economy, they, I mean, there it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. I think the tariffs are too extensive or excessive. I mean, it's one thing to use tariffs in a kind of surgical way, judiciously, to put pressure on countries to make better trade deals, and that's been done in many cases. It's another thing to just view them as like to apply them in a kind of scattershot way, which I think can be very counterproductive. And yeah, so maybe we've encouraged foreign countries to build factories in the United States, and we've created jobs there. But I think the tariffs are actually having a lot of negative effects, like on the farm industry, which is like one of the key constituencies for Trump, and on working class people in various ways. So it's a very iffy thing, and I don't think Basant is really a particularly good spokesman. I mean, he's a good debater. He's good at putting down people with stupid complaints and criticisms, but I don't think I don't think that I don't think the administration is really doing a good job messaging on anything. Even though the positions of the Democrats are, on virtually every issue are unpopular. It's like a 70-30 issue against the Democrats on virtually every issue, if not higher. And yet somehow the Republicans can't seem to create an information strategy or a messaging strategy which is taking advantage of the unpopularity of Democrat policies. I just find that absolutely incredible. And I think that's why I think the midterms are not going to be good. I mean, again, I don't even like the Republicans, but the point is, if the Democrats win, it's going to be worse. It's going to be a total disaster. There's going to be nonstop bogus impeachments and bogus investigations, and just grandstanding grandstanding by all these Democrat politicians. And I mean, it's just going to be insufferable. And and I think I think the only way this thing is going to the only way that so I talked to some people, and they think no, they don't think so. They think the Democrats are overplaying their case, and they don't trust a lot of the polls, and I don't trust a lot of them either. But you got to trust them a little bit. especially when they're in the aggregate. And I just don't see. I mean, even on things like voter, like here's a perfect example: 80% of Americans support voter ID. 80% of
Yeah.
Americans, and yet somehow the Democrats have managed to block its passage in Congress.
And the Republicans.
Yeah, and some of those dumb Republicans, like the ones that really aren't Republicans, like the woman from Maine and the woman from Alaska. Those people are really Democrats. Why are they even in the Republican? Why are they even in the Republican Party? I mean, it's kind of a false advertising. And of course, the Republican establishment are a bunch of cowardly idiots anyway. So I mean, they've always been completely useless. So I don't know. I mean, if you can't even win on a policy that the 80% of Americans support, there's something wrong with your party. I mean,
Deep, yes.
uh,
Um,
I mean,
yeah,
even the majority of Democrats support voter ID.
yeah.
So
It's just unbelievable that this can't be passed. It's such a,
yes, exactly.
it's so disgraceful.
It is a disgrace, but it's also the fact that Congress is just completely and utterly dysfunctional. You know, people complain about executive orders, but what's a president, any president, going to do when they're dealing with a Congress that's completely deadlocked and won't work together to pass any legislation? What can any president do except issue executive orders when Congress is not doing its job? I mean, I can't even believe these people in Congress are collecting salaries. They should be defunded until they actually do something. You know,
Or at Disney World.
yeah, or at Disney World, more.
Yeah, it's incredible that a piece of legislation that 80% of Americans
Support.
want
Yes,
can't be passed. It's literally their job to represent their constituents.
that's correct.
That's
Yeah,
literally their only fucking job.
yeah. But we know that they don't
Um,
represent their constituency. They represent special interests, and they represent, especially in the case of the Democrats, but in some cases on the right too, about religious issues. In the case of the Democrats, they represent the interests of their activist base, and not the interests of their constituents. You know,
yeah.
so so
Um,
that's where we are now. I mean, I don't have much faith in the future of America. Really, I don't. Like I said, I think we're an empire in precipitous decline, and I think one of the reasons is because one party is basically completely and utterly destructive, the Democrats, and the other party is completely and utterly ineffectual, the Republican establishment. I mean, so you know,
I mean,
I,
what are we to do? Is there any turning
I don't
this
know.
around? Or I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm trying to imagine what's going to happen in 2028. I mean, Trump will be out of the scene. But at this point, I just think that the Democrats and their base, and even the progressive goofs that are protesting. I mean, originally it was just like this irrational, visceral Trump hatred based on nonstop propaganda and disinformation. And now, even with Trump, even when Trump's gone, they've extended that irrational hatred to everybody who's not a Democrat. Basically, everybody who's not a Democrat is like an evil Nazi now, for as far as the progressives are concerned, right? So, I mean, when you've got that kind of attitude, it doesn't matter who the Republicans were to choose for a presidential candidate in 2028, even if it was a more establishment figure like Rubio, they'd still be calling him a fascist, just like they called DeSantis a fascist. They called Bush a fascist, for Christ's sake. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten more unhinged. I mean, that's the Democrat rhetoric now. Everybody's a fascist, a Nazi, a racist, a bigot, whatever. I mean, that's all they have to run on is demonizing the opposition because their own policies are not popular. So the only thing the only thing that they have to whip up the support of their base and all these people is just disseminating nonstop hatred uh, against their enemies. You know,
Well, it might work,
yeah, it might
because
work. It might work.
this could just be an interlude of Trump winning one election. And
Correct.
on the right, I see there's doesn't seem to be a ton of enthusiasm for the midterms. And you have a whole faction. I don't know how much influence they actually have. This like third worldist right wing faction that is basically aligned with communists.
Yeah, I don't think
that I think are just trying to destroy MAGA and
well, they
Trump's
are. They are, but
agenda. It's fucking
I don't
absurd and maddening.
I don't think
But
those people are nearly as influential as the media presents them as, though. I don't think people like Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen. Yeah, they have an audience. They have a virtual audience of angry young men. Those people, but they're crackpots. I mean, they're espousing crackpot ideas, and I think the base of the Trump movement is still really solidly behind Trump. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And these people are fringe characters, and they could cause problems. Even if even if 200,000 people don't vote in the midterms, that could be enough to swing certain local elections and help the Democrats win. But to me, I don't understand, what is the Republican Party doing? The Democrats have a vast array of organizations mobilizing their voters
yeah,
and whipping them up into hysteria. What are the Republican Party doing? Nothing,
nothing.
as far as I can see. Nothing.
No, it's like Scott Pressler, like running around making
Yes.
social media videos about registering people to vote. Like
Right.
there's no ground game.
Yeah.
And with Charlie Kirk, he seemed to be holding this thing together with all these different factions on the right.
To some extent,
Uh,
yeah. That's right. But
um,
I mean, I don't understand, how could you be so insane if you're anybody who isn't a leftist or a progressive? How could you be so insane to think that somehow not voting against them is somehow going to have beneficial effects for you? I mean, if the Democrats win the election, it's more censorship and more persecution, more legal persecution, more whatever, all the stuff they did under Biden. It's just going to be on steroids.
yeah, I just
And
think these people don't care. Like Tucker Carlson must not care.
well, he doesn't care because
Um,
he's a rich kid and he's living in Maine in a cabin in the woods. What does he
but
care?
yeah, I just they must just not care, because if you cared, the only thing to be talking about would be passing Save America.
Correct.
So you have free elections. Everything
That's right.
else is bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Basically, if that doesn't pass, and if the Republicans don't do a radical gerrymandering in every one of the states they control, just like the Democrats have already done, if the Republicans don't do this radical gerrymandering, to match the Democrats, and if they don't pass the Save America vote to prevent illegals and other people who are not entitled to vote from voting, then democracy is basically going to be subverted, and I don't think there's any hope for the future.
yeah,
Because
this
the
thing is
Democrats win if the
over.
Democrats win in 2028, there'll be open borders again. They'll open the border. There'll be massive. There'll be giving illegals the right to vote. They'll be doing all the things that they're already trying to do, and now openly admitting they're doing. They used to pretend like they weren't doing that. Now they're openly admitting they're doing that. So I think I think that's where we are, and I don't see how anybody who doesn't want their own vote, any American citizen who doesn't want to be disenfranchised, doesn't want their vote to count for less. I don't see how any American who doesn't want their vote to count for less could possibly vote for the Democrats. I mean, I just don't. I mean, I don't understand it.
Yeah, there's a lot of disenfranchisement, I
Yeah.
think,
Well,
among young people for economic reasons. And then there are just some of these people are like really stupid.
they're really stupid. I mean,
Um,
really stupid.
like
Have you
listen to
seen?
Candace Owens and form their worldview around just like
Correct.
conspiracy, clickbait slop.
Exactly.
And there's a lack of interest in, I don't want to say condemning, but kind of competing with it on the right. Because it's a reaction to the kind of destruction of the legacy media, like the
Yes,
self-destruction of
it
it.
is. That is that.
So people are sort of, there's a layer of suspicion already. And then within that, you have like totally batshit, bad acting conspiracy stuff for clicks that resonates with young people, that is disenfranchising them from
Yeah,
voting
I
and
mean, well,
participating.
they're disenfranchising themselves basically. But look, I think that the strategy adopted by the establishment right, vis-a-vis Fuentes and those people, is completely under the kind of, we talked about this before, and I'll just briefly mention it again. First of all, they're exaggerating the influence that they have, which is a bad mistake. And then secondly, they're trying to gatekeep, they're trying to censor them. That makes them more popular. So that combination is like a double disaster. You should ignore them, but not try to censor them. That would be the smart strategy.
Ignore. I agree.
Ignore them. Now, on the left, you've got a much more serious problem. You've got like sectarian communist groups basically infiltrating local chapters of the Democratic Party. I mean, not only radical elements within the Democratic Socialists of America, but members of actual sectarian communist groups are now infiltrating the Democratic Party. And the people running the party don't seem to be concerned about it. They don't seem to be interested in gatekeeping at all. I mean, as I've said before, it's important for legitimate parties to keep extremists on the fringes, not to let them infiltrate and take over their parties. But the Democrats, at this point, are basically allowing extremists to enter their party, and these people are activists. They're people who are willing to put in the hours and mobilize and work hard, like the idiots Mamdani's hiring. These people are extremists, but they're willing to work 12 hours a day pushing their crackpot agendas, right? So this is where the Democratic Party is going. It's being completely taken over by its activist base, which is increasingly unhinged and deranged. And the establishment of the Democratic Party is just throwing up their hands and desperately kissing their ass or pandering to them. Look at Chuck Schumer, for fuck's sake. Chuck Schumer is just like a total pussy. I mean, he's basically kissing the left's ass, like all these establishment Democrats. He's kissing these radicals' asses because he's desperate to try to maintain himself in office. But he's going to be ousted anyway, because one of these radicals is going to win an election, and he will not be in Congress much longer. A lot of these people who are pandering to the left, kowtowing to the left, are eventually they're digging their own grave.
Yeah.
Because they're allowing more and more extremists to take over their party, and those extremists are going to vote for people much more radical than they are. And they're going to be out of their friggin' ear, man, which is where, frankly, where they belong. A lot of those people have been in Congress way too long, and they're a bunch of corrupt, unprincipled assholes anyway. So I don't care if I ever see Schumer's ugly face again, or Gerald, what's the guy, Jerry
Nadler.
Jerry Nadler. If I never saw that guy again, he's like a monster from a horror movie, So, my point being is, if these people are ousted from the party, who gives a shit? Good riddance.
Just they're going to be replaced by the
extremists,
commies.
They are, but I think ultimately that might be a good thing, not for the Democrats, but for the country, because that, I think, is going to alienate a lot of the moderates. I think a lot of moderates who now vote for the Democrats, if these kind of radicals take over the Democratic Party and they're really pushing even more and more radical agendas, that's going to be so off-putting to the majority of Americans. It's going to be so off-putting to the majority of Americans.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things where you almost feel like maybe it'd be a good thing to let radicals to take over the Democratic Party and influence their platform even more, to make their policies even more unpopular than they already are. Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That might be the only thing that can wake up the somnambulant majority, who's just sitting around complaining because gas prices are too high.
Well, if California is a test case for that, it's not really working, because it's just like it feels like we're already at that point.
But I think in California,
kind of clueless, and like they're just sort of clueless here.
But I think the problem in California is not so much that the Democrats are more popular. It's they've created a control mechanism. They've basically created a one-party state in California, with all kinds of rules and regulations and structures that make it almost impossible for opposition candidates to gain traction or win elections. And so I think a lot of what they've done is they've really created a kind of authoritarian structure in Sacramento, and with committees and with processes and with referenda and with various kinds of things. They're really making it almost impossible for people who oppose them to gain any traction, much less win any elections. So yeah. I think it has more to do with the mechanisms of control that they have than anything else in California.
Right. Well, let's hope Gavin Newsom isn't the president of this country.
It's hard to see it. I mean, he's such a incompetent fool. I mean, California has been so mismanaged under Newsom's governorship. I mean, imagine him doing for the country what he's done for California. You know, I mean, totally destroying it.
Yeah, and he's just like a malicious idiot.
He is
On
he's a
top of
malicious idiot.
everything.
He's a malicious idiot who's and in my opinion, he's a narcissistic sociopath
Totally.
and a person who has no principles at all except maintaining his own power. You know, and but of course, politicians have to have some of that. I mean, otherwise they probably wouldn't run for office. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, Trump has that narcissistic aspect to him too, you know, and uh, and so do pretty much every. I mean, so does Obama, despite his, you know, his facade of pseudo intellectualism, you know.
Totally. Yeah,
So
Obama. I'm still reckoning with the damage that Obama has done to this
Obama
country.
was an absolute catastrophe.
I can't believe I fell for it
I
at
didn't
the
either.
time.
I fell for it. I voted for him twice. I mean, that's
Me
how
too.
stupid I was. But then again, I mean, I couldn't. The alternatives. I mean, McCain and Palin, and then that idiot Mitt Romney. I mean, I
Obama started all of this. All
he
of this
started.
race stuff.
He really started the DEI stuff, pushing the DEI in government agencies. So now you've got millions of incompetent people in government agencies who are hired on non-meritorious criteria. You've got millions of partisans. He also politicized the U.S. government agencies in a way that hadn't been done before. He, instead of healing race relations, he poured gasoline on the fire and created more racial divisions. I mean, and then on top of all that, he was a blatant appeaser of Islam and Islamism, and a weakling in terms of foreign policy. I mean, Obama was an absolute catastrophe, and but the one thing he had going for him was that he had a very slick way of presenting himself. You know,
Yep.
he was a good talker. He was he's one of those people who had the pseudo intellectual veneer. He made even crackpot ideas sound reasonable. You know, I mean, he was likable. Obama was likable on a personal level. You
Yeah.
know? And so he had those qualities that the politicians need to be successful. But unfortunately, he used all of his political skills to do enormous amount of damage.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think that's a good place to end, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me.